Hey guys, so today I'm going to be doing a video all about feeding tubes, specifically NG tubes, which are the ones that I have the most experience with. Now basically NG stands for nasogastric, so it goes in your nose and then down to your stomach. So it goes up your nostril, in your nose, down your esophagus, and it lands in your stomach. NG tubes are used when someone is not able to get nutrition orally. So it's basically able to put any liquids into your stomach, and liquids can be from like Ensure, Boost, special formulas like EleCare, Breeze, pulverized food. I watched a documentary about eating disorders, and at that treatment center they actually just blended the food together and put it through the tube, which I had never heard of, but I guess you could do it technically. And then also you can put water in it and med syrup, I guess. So basically, if you are not able to take your meds orally either, or are refusing your medications, then they will just push it through the tube. So yeah, basically any liquid, like I said. I had a girl in my treatment center who was on constant feeds and her tube would get really clogged. So they'd flush it with soda because of the carbonation. I don't know, it just like helped move it through better. So the tubes that I've had are long and thin, and they're kind of like a bright yellow color. All up the side of the tube, it has centimeter markings so that you know when to stop pushing it into your body. Now there are two ports, and the port is what you actually like put the syringe into, or you attach it to your pump. And there are two ports so that you can push fluids in like Boost, Ensure, formula, and then there's another port so that you can push medications in at the same time. Just has a hole, and it's kind of harder than the rest of the tube. Now there is a guide wire in the tube to make insertion easier, but the guide wire is taken out once it is properly inserted. There are different sizes. At my treatment center they use sizes 8, but when I was in the hospital my nose got so swollen from having tubes in it that they had to use a size 6, which is just a thinner tube so that it could actually fit in my nose. Now I'm just going to run you guys through my experience with the insertion process and how it kind of went, so that if you guys are having to get an NG tube, then you will be more familiar with what's actually going on. So the end of the tube will be measured kind of at your belly button, and so you'll put the end of the tube, they'll put the end of the tube at your belly button, and then you'll go up your esophagus and then to your nose, and then they'll just drape the rest around the ear. So once it's like to your nose is when they like put tape around it, or they like mark it with a marker so that they know how far to push it in. Now this next part is not necessary, but every time I've gotten my tube in, they have done it just because it makes everything a lot easier. So what they do is they will coat the end of the feeding tube in a lubricant. I absolutely hate this part just because I hate the smell of it, I hate the taste of it, and I just think it's absolutely disgusting. It makes the whole process more painful, but in the long run it does make it a lot easier. So the nurse will then insert the tube into your nostril. So it's normal for it to hurt. Sometimes people feel a burning sensation, sometimes it can feel like you're poking at a bruise, and a lot of times it just makes you feel like you have to sneeze. I have been having it inserted and then I just sneeze on the person's hand. Kind of gross, but you know, they're professionals, they're used to it. So there is a certain point in your nose that once you hit, it's pretty hard to get past. So you can usually get it up there, but then it's hard to hit it. But then once you do hit it, it will just go down your throat. Okay, so when you feel the tube in your throat, if you were to open your mouth, you would be able to see the tube kind of like the end of the tube kind of just dangling there. So it will usually make you cough and gag. But what you need to do when this starts happening is you immediately start to swallow. The more you swallow, the more you get used to it, and also if you swallow, it will help the tube go down, and once it gets past your throat and starts going down your esophagus, it will be a lot easier to manage. Now when I got my tube in, All 4 times I had a cup of water, and I just sipped on the cup of water while it was going down until it was down, and that was so extremely helpful. It made it a lot easier. I highly recommend that. Most nurses will do that, but if they don't, I recommend asking for a cup of water. If it's going down your esophagus and you still feel like you're gagging, the best thing you can do is to just keep swallowing. The more you swallow, the more you will get used to the feeling, and you'll get so used to it by the time you get it taken out, you're gonna be like, what's wrong with my throat? There's nothing there, and it's gonna be really confusing. Now, the nurse will keep pushing the tube until it has reached the mark of tape or the mark of like marker. So the nurse will then use tape or Tegaderm to tape it down to the side of your cheek, depending on which nostril it's in. And then just the excess tube, most people just drape it around the ear. If it's really long, you can tape it to your back to make it easier so it's out of your way. I personally like to wear my hair in a ponytail with a headband and just put the tube in the headband so it was out of my face. So after it's taped to your face, the nurse usually will take the guide wire out. So after it's in, your nurse will do 1 to 3 tests to make sure that it is in your stomach. Now, the first test is you can get an x-ray to see if the tube is in your stomach. I did this when I was in the hospital, but I did not do this when I was at my treatment center. So the second test is your nurse will stick the syringe in your port and pull out gastric juices. And then they will test your fluids on a pH strip to make sure that your tube is in the right place. The third test is your nurse will take a syringe and they'll pull out on the syringe so that there's air in the syringe. And then they'll put that in your port, and then they will push down and they'll have a stethoscope and they'll listen to your stomach, and they should be able to hear kind of like bubbles in your stomach. Now at my treatment center, we did the last 2 things when getting the tube inserted, but before each feed, and this was the same at the hospital, they would push air through it and listen with a stethoscope just to make sure that it didn't move. So there are multiple types of feeding. You can have a pump that you connect to your port, and that will go at certain milliliters an hour. You can have gravity feeds with a syringe where you basically just put your formula into the syringe, and then the nurse or staff member will push it into your tube. So typically your tube will need to be flushed every 4 to 6 hours. And when I had a constant feed, so my tube was constantly pushing Ensure and Live into my stomach, I could digest it easier. And technically, if you have a constant feed, you don't have to flush your tube. But I would say, better be safe than sorry. I would flush it, that's just my opinion. Especially because you don't want to get it clogged, because then you have to get another tube. And then after each feed, your tube will be flushed with water. Typically at my treatment center, I think they used 60 mLs. So there are some tube side effects. The first thing is pretty gross. When you are going to the bathroom, specifically when you're pooping and you're like pushing really hard, typically you will be able to hear your gastric juices running up the tube. So your throat will tend to hurt for the first couple days, especially if you had a hard time getting the tube inserted. If you're mostly only having feeds and not eating that much food, your pee might smell like the formula that you have. So when I was in the hospital, I was on my constant feed, and some days I wouldn't eat anything at all because I was too nauseous. So my pee would smell like Ensure and Live, and it was kind of gross, but I asked the nurse and she said it was normal. So I think I mentioned this before in a video, but at my treatment center, kind of the basic guideline was if you had 3 refusals in a row, so that's like just like if you have a refusal one day and then the next day and the next day, typically your team will order a tube for you. Now in my experience, they took a while to order the tube for me. I think I probably had like 20 refusals before they actually ordered the tube, but I'm not sure why, but that's just how it worked out. And then sometimes people have like 3 and they're instantly like tube. So It really depends. So this is just how it worked at my treatment center. There was also a hospital in the area that had an eating disorder unit, and how they did it there is if you didn't eat your meal, they instantly put the tube in, they pushed your meal, and then they pulled the tube out. I'm very grateful that that's not how my treatment center worked, just because the whole insertion process for me was very traumatic. So as most of you guys know, I have emetophobia, so that's an extreme fear of throwing up. And I was not that scared to get my tube in, but then when I felt it in my throat and it made me gag, I was extremely scared. So I did end up pulling out my tube 4 times, not because I didn't want the nutrition, but because I just didn't want to feel like that. So they wouldn't actually get it down to my stomach, but they'd like get it like right here, and I just couldn't handle it. And I wasn't even doing it on purpose. It's just like my hand like reached up and just yanked it out. I think if you think that might be a problem with you, I think the best thing is to sit on your hands. That's what I did the next 3 times because I, didn't want to give the nurses any trouble. So I used my tube the first day. So what would happen is we had a meal, and what you didn't finish of the meal, they would give you Boost or Insure for. So they'd give me the Insure, and you're supposed to try to drink it in the 15 minutes, but if you didn't drink it, then they would push it in your tube, and that would not be counted as a refusal. But if you did not have a tube and you refused to drink it, that would be counted as a refusal. So at my treatment center, they kind of go by the guideline that if you don't use your tube for 3 days, then they will take it out. My first time with my feeding tube, I had it in for 3 weeks, and then my last 3 tubes were not in for very long. So 3 of the times that I had my tube placed, they gave me Ativan, which is an anxiety medication typically used for patients who have a lot of anxiety with medical procedures. So like I said, yeah, I've had 4 tubes, 3 at the hospital, and then 1 at my treatment center. If you would like to know why I've had 4 tubes, I think I can do a story time on that, but that's like a whole nother separate video. And then if you would also like to know my feeding tube placement horror story, which I think was for my 4th tube, then I could definitely also do story time on that video. I could probably fit those into one video just because they're pretty similar, but I don't know. So some more side effects that I forgot to mention is typically when you take pills, specifically more than 1 at a time, they will struggle to get down and they might like stay in your throat, so make sure you're drinking a lot of water with your medications. Also, when I would eat, especially sticky things like peanut butter, it would get stuck in my throat and it would make my tube tighten. So the tube would be like this, but then the tube would like go up my nose and it would pull at my nostril and it would make me have the urge to sneeze. So when I first had my feeding tube, they only did gravity feeds, and I did not like gravity feeds because it was just going into my stomach at too quick of a pace, and sometimes it would make me sick. So when I had my tube, I started refusing the feeds because at my treatment center, they did not do restraints. You had the right to basically refuse everything. They'd still do something about that. They'd send you to the hospital where they do have restraints, and they would push it anyway. So yes, that is my NG tube experience and the whole process of getting them inserted. I hope you guys liked this video. I hope it was helpful to you guys, and feel free to comment below any questions or your own experiences. Alright guys, that's all for today. Thank you guys for watching, and have a good rest of the day.